In the 1950s, 1960s, and 70s, Timex watches were super cool. They had the best celebrity endorsements. They had boxing legend Rocky Marciano. They had baseball legend Mickey Mantle. They had golf legend Ben Hogan. Heck, they even had jazz legend Louis Armstrong singing about Timex watches.
For a Timex commercial.
Timex watches also have a great look. Sometimes trendy, sometimes space age, sometimes traditional. The Timex Marlin, introduced in the 1960s, has a classic look that is still a hot item today. On top of that, they were tough as nails watches. They were the watch that could take a licking and keep on ticking. They could do things that other watches simply could not do. For example, take a look at this video.
Now we have attached a Timex Marlin to the arrowhead, and we're going to ask Bill Brining to give us a demonstration. Bill, will you shoot this arrow through that pane of glass right there?
Try.
Good. I don't know what I can say to add to that. Bill is going to retrieve that arrow with the Timex still fixed to the arrowhead from the water. Thank you very much, Bill. Thank you. Now let's see how it took this torture test. Yes, it's still running perfectly, and if I can get this at just the right angle, ladies and gentlemen, you can see for yourself. There, you see that second hand going around? You know, only Timex, with its exclusive V-conic movement, can take such a licking and keep on ticking.
And yet, despite the popularity of these watches, despite the classic look, despite the toughness, despite the celebrity endorsements, they're just not popular with collectors. In fact, in ads like this for ABC Jewelry Exchange under Watches We Buy, you can see there's Audemars Piguet, Breguet, Cartier, Heuer, Omega, Panerai, Patek Philippe, etc. But at the bottom of the list, no Timex, please. Why is that? Why are these watches, that seem to have so many things going for them, shunned by watch collectors? That coming up next. To understand why vintage Timex watches are not as good as other watches, you have to look at the movement and how it's constructed. So this is a wheel in a typical watch movement. The pins of this wheel are very, very tiny. The tips of the pins are so small that they actually can't be seen with the naked eye. But what this does is it makes the pins very accurate because there's very little friction, and that increases the accuracy of the movement, especially when you put them in jewels. And this is what a jewel looks like. So the wheel is underneath, of course, and the pin goes through this ruby jewel. And because the ruby is so finely polished and so hard, it has very little friction. So the parts last a very long time, and as I mentioned previously, very low friction and high accuracy. But with Timex, they went a different route. This Timex ad explains American science triumphs again, and if you zoom in, it explains why. Instead of the tiny pins found on other movements, Timex movements had very wide, thick pins with wedge shapes on the end instead of tiny, tiny ends. And instead of jewels, they were set into hard metal plates. And so this made them stronger than other movements. And it says here that they were fined to within 0.002 of an inch, so they were said to be very accurate in that V shape. And here it says they were timed to 0.001 of a second. I'm not even sure what that means. It certainly doesn't mean per day. Does it mean per hour? Does it mean per minute? Who knows? But Timex said that they were very, very accurate watches. Unfortunately, this was simply not the case. While they were reasonably accurate, they were not as accurate as other watches, and certainly not as accurate as chronometers. So while their marketing was excellent, watchmakers knew the real story. And with Timex watches, there were also a difference between the anchor or the pallet fork and the escape wheel. So here we see a pallet fork from a regular watch. It's shaped like an anchor, which is why they call it Anker in German. And it has rubies on the ends, and that's the part that interacts with the wheel. So that reduced friction, made it very robust. And if it ever wore out, although it would take hundreds of years potentially, you could replace the rubies or replace the pallet fork. And on a regular watch, the pallet fork and the escape wheel look like this. The pallet fork has teeth that interact with the wheel, and as the wheel turns, the pallet fork flops back and forth and releases energy from the watch. This is in a normal movement. So in a movement, normal movement, this is what the escape wheel looks like that I showed earlier. And in the movement working, it looks like this. Right in the center of the screen, kind of half hidden underneath that plate, you can see the escape wheel moving. And I'm trying to point it out with my tweezers here. And set into the jewel right beside it is the anchor, and it's clicking back and forth, releasing energy from the movement. That's how it works. Now this is my grandfather's Timex watch. And as you can see, it's quite beat up. The acrylic is cracked. It's got pieces, soldered to the back, worn out on the sides, and yet it still runs and it still has a classic look. And so that's what Timex Marlins were known for, is that robustness to work despite being abused. And it still looks pretty good, quite frankly. Now, if I pop open the case back here, let's give it a little snap. There we go. You can see what the movement looks like. A very plain, basic-looking movement. Even if you don't know anything about watches, you can tell this is quite industrial and made. And another thing I'd like to point out here, I'll just turn it around, is the fact that it only has one screw. So right here at the top, that's the only screw in this movement, and that's to take out the crown and the stem. That is the only screw in this entire movement, and I'll come back to that later because that is very important. So if I zoom in here, you can see underneath this plate, that is the escape wheel. So the same part I showed you before on the other watch, this is what it looks like on a Timex. Let me get it in screen here. So this part here on the Timex looks like this instead. Very, very basic teeth, quite crudely made. That's what it looks like. Now, if I give the watch a wind here and get it going, there we are. So you can see that wheel in action. And if you look at the yellow piece, that's the equivalent of the anchor. So it's an anchor, but instead of ruby pieces on it, it just has metal pins. So the anchor in this case and the escape wheel is metal on metal, the same as the pins. And that means more friction, that means less accuracy. And that's the way these things were designed. This is known as a pin lever movement instead of a Swiss anchor movement. So if you take a Timex watch movement and compare it to another inexpensive watch movement, in this case a Russian movement, you can see the difference. Even if you don't know anything about watches, even if you don't know anything about watch parts, you instinctively know that the movement on the right is a superior movement. And once manufacturers realized this, they started to use this against Timex in their advertising. In this ad from Caravel, which is a low-end offering from Bulova, they've simply done that. They've put the two watches in the ad, and saying this is why a $10.95 Caravel is a better watch than a Timex. People can tell just by looking. In the 1950s and 60s, you could buy a Timex watch anywhere. You could go to your local newsstand and pick up a copy of your favorite pulp fiction magazine, a pack of Lifesavers, and a Timex watch and be on your way home. So back to the watch for a moment. I mentioned earlier that the Timex movement doesn't have any screws except the one to take out the crown. So how do you service it? How do you repair it? Well, the answer is you don't. And pause. In the first edition of this video, when I said that the watch only has one screw and can't be serviced, some Timex fans came on the comment section and said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, you're wrong about this. It has more than one screw, and it can be serviced. Check the manual." So I did. And they were right, for the most part. It does have more than one screw, and it can be serviced, although not in the conventional manner. The recommended way for servicing this movement is to take off the dial and the date wheel, of course, then to take off 6 or 7 other pieces, for example, the ratchet wheel washer, and the date wheel assembly in this example here, and then to take the entire movement and swish it around in solvent, popularly lighter fluid. Now, I don't know any watchmaker who would consider swishing around the movement in lighter fluid to be a proper servicing, but nonetheless, this was quite ingenious, I thought. Timex probably realized that at a retail price of $9.95, and with a movement that looks like this, no one was going to be taking it to a watchmaker to be serviced anyway, and if they did, the watchmaker would probably refuse to work on it. Watchmakers are like that. And so, this was a way to at least do a rudimentary servicing by yourself at home. Quite clever. And now, back to our regular programming. The pins are metal on metal, and although they're thick and robust, they wear out because they're metal on metal. The escape wheel and the pins are metal on metal. These watches were designed to be used and worn until they wore out, and then they were thrown away. They were made to be disposable watches. So when you were done with your pulp fiction magazine, you could throw it away. When you were done with your Lifesavers, you could throw it away. And when your Timex watch wore out, you would throw it away. It was a disposable watch, and that is why it is not popular with collectors today. In many ways, Timex watches of the 50s, 60s, and 70s are similar to Chinese-made quartz watches of today. They look good, they're stylish, they're accurate, and they're reliable. If you need to service one, you're probably out of luck, and even if you can service it, it doesn't make sense to do so anyway. It's less expensive just to throw the watch away and buy a new one. So, if Timex watches were inferior in many ways to other watches, why did they remain so popular for so long?
More people than ever before are wearing a Timex today.
Well, fortunately, we don't need to guess as to the reason, because we have an International U.S. Trade Commission report from 1959 that explains it. Timex success was due to a few different reasons. First, there was Proclamation 3062. In 1954, the U.S. Tariff Commission decided that foreign watches were being imported into the U.S. in quantities that may injure or threaten the domestic industry. So, on July 27, 1954, President Eisenhower raised tariffs on any foreign watches with 0 to 17 joules in the movement. In other words, they raised the prices on all foreign watches that would be competing directly with Timex and the domestic watch industry. Secondly, as noted earlier, Timex had amazing advertising. And if you weren't convinced the first time, here's one more example.
Now let's have our live demonstration. Now here you can see we've strapped a Timex 100 to the propeller of this motor. Let's immerse that motor in the tank, okay? We're going to rev it up any time now. I'm sure you'll agree with me, ladies and gentlemen, if that Timex comes through this torture test, it can stand up to just about anything that may happen. Yeah, that looks like it. Well, if that Timex comes through, as I said, it can stand up to anything that will happen in daily wear. Just look at that. Timex waterproof, flash through the water to the tune of 4,500 revolutions a minute. I think that's enough. I'm sure that's enough for the folks, and the way I'm getting wet, it's enough for me. Pull it right out now, will you? Let's take a look. Yes, it's still ticking. Let me turn it around so you can get a look. It took the torture test. Still running perfectly. For only Timex, with its exclusive V-conic movement, can take such a licking and keep on ticking.
The third reason for Timex success, according to the U.S. International Trade Commission, was their design strategy. As they put it, Timex growth is attributable to the company's foresight in taking an inexpensive working man's watch product and adding the styling of a high-cost watch. In other words, Timex realized that many of their consumers preferred style over substance. As long as the watch looked expensive, what was inside didn't matter so much.
Now just look at the slimness there, the smartness of its lines.
They added that consumers, choosing between an attractive $8 Timex with a 1-year guarantee or a much more expensive and presumably higher quality alternative, purchased the Timex. According to Timex, by the end of the 1950s, 1 in every 3 watches sold in the USA was a Timex. In 1973, of the 21,776,000 watches produced in the US, 21 million were from Timex. Of course, the Timex of yesteryear is not the same as the Timex of today. Today, Timex offers quartz watches, which are excellent, like the Timex Expedition series, available in a variety of faces and models. It also has the Timex Weekender series, like this chronograph, which I think is a gorgeous watch. And they've introduced some of the old classics as well, including the Timex Marlin. Except now, instead of the more robust but unable to be serviced movement, they're using a modern mechanical movement with pins and rubies, made to last forever and with higher-end accessories like the leather straps and the gold-plated straps. Very nice watches, very good movements, and I should point out that Timex isn't paying me to say that. That's of my own goodwill and what I think of the company. But if anyone from Timex is listening, feel free to send me a Marlin because I'd really like one. Well, that's my review of vintage Timex watches and why they are not popular with collectors. I hope you enjoyed the video. In the links below, I have put some information on the modern Timex watches that I do like and links to those. There are many more videos to come, so if you haven't already subscribed, please hit the subscribe button as well as the like, and I will see you in the next video.